Aye. Right, we'll move to item 6, which is the adoption of committee resolutions. The first up is Risk and Assurance Committee meeting of the December the 6th. Linda, would you like to comment on that?
No comment really, thank you, Chairman. How do you do?
Moved by Linda, seconded by Phil. I'll put the motion that the adoption of the resolutions is approved. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Second is the Climate Change Subcommittee meeting of the 13th of December. Morris, would you like to comment?
To move that, we had one question that we just needed to resolve here was the status of the committee as to whether it was a subcommittee or a I think Rachel was going to deal with that, or we normally might have a answer.
So the subcommittee is currently a subcommittee, as you agree, Council, at the inaugural council meeting. It's a subcommittee of the Strategy and Policy Committee.
Right. That was the only thing really I wanted to raise. Oh well, I suppose I should say that the climate change interagency group, we appointed Councillor Morrison to be the representative on that. I was going to have before at time about the chairmanship of that particular committee. It was a bit unclear to me as to how that will be resolved. Does anybody have any information on that?
Are you talking about the two separate committees? As I understood it, the domestic committee that was actually looking at our own response is chaired by yourself, and the interagency one was to be chaired by Phil. That was my understanding. Is that the
There's a representative from this council on that interagency committee, but who will be the chairman of the interagency committee?
Well, we've been given the task with the leadership in that role, so it would be Bill. Yeah.
All right, that's good. Thank you very much. All right, well, I'm happy to move those.
I'll second. Moved and seconded. I'll put the resolution. All in favour will say aye. Okay, we'll move to the Finance and Performance Committee meeting on 14th of December.
Happy to move those, Mr. Chairman. Once again,
Morris, seconded by Jeremy. The resolution, all in favour say aye. Aye. And there is the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group meeting of the 16th of December. Well, if you never walk up,
Jim, that was just a meeting to sort out our structure for the training. And I was appointed as the chair of the Health and Civil Defence Emergency Management Group, which actually is the group which represents all of the councils on a regional basis.
well, thanks for that. Happy to second that resolution. All in favour say aye. Just going back to the ordinary meeting, I admitted that there's a slight typo on the top of page 7 where we resolved risk and assurance twice instead of regulatory. Small matter. I'm sure can be tidied up. Right, we will move to item 7, which is the notification of extraordinary urgent business, supplementary reports or other. I'm not aware of any this morning. So we'll move to item 9, questions. Robert, you have a question this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question is with regard to climate change and reads, what tonnage and what percentage of Southland's greenhouse gas output does Fonterra's Edendale factory create by day, week and by year? And I ask it in light of a report that was released, I think 3 weeks ago, that showed Fonterra being the worst contributor of greenhouse gases in New Zealand. And while it's not a question that I'm going to ask now, I wonder where that puts Southland in terms of rankings of a region contributing greenhouse gas per capita to the climate change issue.
Do we have an answer or are we waiting?
We don't, so Rachel has the answer.
Through you, Chair, we have contacted Fonterra and they will hopefully provide us with some further information that we can report on in due course, but we do have some information we can share with you today. So in terms of our own consenting processes, up until the end of November last year, we weren't able to take into account the greenhouse gas emissions. That the legislation will change recently. So going forward, that will form part of the consent process. But so we don't have information from our own consenting processes at this time, but what we do have is information from the inventories that Great South have done. So some figures specifically from the 2018 inventory, and we can report this up to you more formally. But what those figures show, the scientist has arrived, if you've got questions around this, is that from the information available, the annual percentage contribution from Fonterra burning coal only, so this isn't including their transportation, workers, energy or waste components, to Southland's carbon dioxide emissions of 2.29%. So very happy to provide a written report on that. There's quite a lot of seasonal fluctuation. So again, it's worth looking at some of the graphs, etc., to see how things move through the year.
I understand we have a visit to the factory coming up, and I'm sure that Convery will perhaps be happy to add to some detail when we're there too.
Well, thank you. I hope that's the case, Mr. Chairman, because it's been very difficult. And I notice now I've been given a percentage, but not no figures around the actual output. So I did ask for a percentage. So I'd like to ask the question: how much tonnage are they putting out in the atmosphere?
And we do those pretty much year
Right, thank you. That's very good. And that is in 2018, not for.
It's based on that information, and we do have some information from last year as well. So we'll provide all of it.
Thank you very much.
Peter, you were indicating?
Chairman, I think it's a good question, Robert, and I think on the upcoming trip out there, it's probably more looking towards the future. What is the intent to reduce that amount, and what are the timelines? Are they appropriate for the province? So I think it could be a good long question.
Thank you. We'll move to item 9, which is Chairman's and Councillors' reports. It's reasonably early in the year, but I've attended a number of meetings, and physically or Zooming. One of the ones which has been simplifying the Mayoral Forum, or the combined Otago South and Mayoral Forums, has been the decision on the 23rd of December to reduce the size of the Dunedin Hospital, and that has raised a number of concerns, as you've probably seen in the newspapers. I've been informed this morning that the new minister will be happy to meet with the delegation of the Otago South and Mayors and chairs to discuss that issue. I'd just like to comment and congratulate the staff on the public gathering we had on the Mataura flood banks. I thought that was a really good exercise. People in charge of it were able to answer all the questions, and the chief guy who's been at Edgecombe, he's been on the West Coast. If he didn't say it once, he said it 3 or 4 times, how impressed he was that this council moved quickly to deal with an issue that could have been serious. He made the comment that time and time again, in his experience, people waited for the disaster before they did anything. We know this is done under emergency work. It's actually there will be a longer and more comprehensive plan brought up over time to deal with that whole catchment, and indeed, I guess, all our other catchments. We know with the changing weather patterns that we are going to have more frequent floods, and we can't just continue to build flood banks up. So a more comprehensive plan will obviously be developed. But it was a good day, and we had people from the community there they had their questions answered. So it's a well done to the staff. But I'll leave it there. Anybody else got any reports? Neville?
Yeah, the questions that arose during that visit, Chairman, I think there were three that every one of them was about gravel management. So I think we've got some work to do, and I know there's a report later in the meeting, but we've got some work to do to inform the community up there about our efforts relating to gravel management.
Paul, would you like to comment on this?
There is a paper from Paul later on the agenda, I think.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yeah, gravel is an important component to flood management. And I think we've said quite openly through the process that strategic management of gravel is really important. It goes hand in hand with the data that we're trying to get, whether it's the bathymetric data or the LiDAR data to help inform the work programme going forward around the movement of gravel or the relocation of gravel. So that's active. I'll be able to provide some updates as we've trucked through the year. We have actively been looking at sites in the Gore and Matara area, and I'll probably be able to give you an update later on in the coming weeks around particular areas of concern in Matara and a potential solution that we've worked through. So there's little bits of improvements, but overall we need a strategic gravel management approach. So I'll be bringing that back to council in the foreseeable future.
Now, thanks for that, Paul. And we've had a meeting at the Hawknaree Marae late last year, organised by Iwi, and they are very keen on that total management of the river. I'd like to see wetlands incorporated. At the end of the day, we know we need to probably be able to slow water down and spill it. We've spent a century straightening rivers and speeding them up, and the mindset is obviously going to change going forward. That also had some interesting information on returning rates to rivers and the ability to deliver really good environmental outcomes for bird life, nesting, but also returning a bit of natural character in places where it's appropriate. So it's going to be an ongoing discussion. Morris, you had a question.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm sorry I couldn't make that meeting on the day. I would have liked to have gone, but I was in Nelson at the time. One question I would have asked there, and it relates to the effect or potential effect that the freezing river and the Avonmouth has. Where the work's being done, the river's about 80 metres wide on average, as measured on Google Earth. But where the freezing works and the paper mill are just below the waterfall there, it's about 35 metres wide. And I just wondered whether any consideration be given to the potential effect of that constriction slowing up the water, causing more backup, causing the water level to be higher for longer, whether that something that was being considered.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, you Councillor Rodway, you're quite correct that it's a narrow point at that area. Although the protection is designed to provide 2,400 cubic meters of flow down the river, and so that into 2020 we managed to do that. And obviously the work that we've done subsequent to that demonstrates that the stopbacks have held up well from that test. And whilst I don't think the river engineers are overly concerned about pitch point, the main focus for us going forward would be the railway bridge, because we can't get any more flow under the current railway bridge as it stands. So I think the goal, the railway bridge is goal. So as I understand it, that's the area that from a sort of medium to long term plan needs to be addressed at some point in the future. So we're looking currently with the climate change programme to find out ways to increase channel capacity in that area. But obviously longer term conversations around infrastructure will need to happen as well. So I would say, yes, I agree. It's a tight point there, but actually the focus is further down at the Gore Railway Bridge area.
Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to support your comments and Paul's comments about gravel management. A lot of people I've talked to think it's the only thing, the only response in town, but it's part of, it's not all of. And Well, I feel really pleased how simply.
Any further verbal reports this morning? I know it's early in the year and we haven't done much. If not, we will move to item 10, the staff report, and first up is the chief executive report. Wilma, would you like to speak to your comprehensive report?
Thank you, Chair and Philip Koto. I'm just wanting to run through a few highlights in this report and to sneak in an updated report from Simon Mapp about the situation in Auckland when we get to discussing the EMS part of this report. So thanks, Simon, for coming. Just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. We clearly, with the exception of yesterday, very briefly experiencing incredibly dry weather in this region, and we are going to talk about that in a paper very shortly, but that has been a real matter for staff focus right across the summer break. So we will discuss some of that in more detail, but there have been additional work in place, as I mentioned on page 37, around the actual hydrological gear that's there. So make sure that we know exactly the state that's going on. There's been a significant amount of work done on the interagency operating procedures around this and our relationship with the territorial authorities, with ELI, with the community and industry organisations that we keep in touch with around this. And we learned a great deal from experiencing a serious drought last year, and also where that handover happens actually to EMS in terms of their capacity to support us. And while drought is one of those things that doesn't actually get covered by the Act that defines some of the work that EMS does, it has capacity to act on behalf of the region where it can. So there's good learnings from last year and the way we work. We discussed the gravel management in detail. I was going to have invite Paul down to talk about that, but he's done that. The other matter that I do want to talk about is the high-risk tree removal in the Waihopai. So that's been quite a high-profile piece of work that we've been doing, and the communication from the organisation has been primarily through online and media channels. It has resulted in those who are close to the stock bank in the Waihopai area being able to see the industrial area with a lot more clarity than they ever did before. And I think that that's caused some real concern about the nature of that work and the need to ensure that communities, are informed perhaps in a variety of channels, in face-to-face and early. And there's certainly, we have received some correspondence that we are replying to now from individuals, and we've had some concerns raised with us about the impact of the visual impact of that removal. I thought I might actually just ask Paul to come and talk about that briefly, though, from a safety perspective and the reason why we're doing the work, and also what the follow-up with the community will be.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I think we've discussed this previously in people council or committee meetings, where the risks to stock bank failures, about 20 different risks failure, and trees are one of the quite significant that are planted either on the stock bank or in close proximity to the stock bank, and in times of a storm or flood can fall over, create cavities in the stock bank, and therefore creating stock banks to fail. So over the last year, we've been incrementally going through our assets to try to de-risk any issues around stock banks. So you'll note that we've done rabbit control as well, because they pose quite a significant risk to stock banks. So the reason for that is the risk to the stock bank failure, but noting that also, which has been discussed as well publicly, that we are likely to enter a phase of higher floods, longer peaks through the Interdecadal Pacific Oscillation phenomenon. I think I got that right. And that's a 20-year period where we, if you cast your mind back to these late 70s and 80s, where a lot of the floods happened, we're entering a similar phase again. And so hand in hand with that information and climate change, we need to look at our assets and look at ways to incrementally make sure that we're doing the right things by protection. And so the Waihopai work is one of a number of tree works that we're going to be doing over the next few months. And I think we're planning to do Gore as well. And at the Mashara meeting, I stood up and said, if I needed to go to any community meeting to front this work, because I know trees are important conversations to community and you know, trees are protected and in most cases you don't want to take trees down, but in these cases it's really important. So commitment to go to as many community meetings over the next few months just to get that message across. And to Wilma's point, people that have complained or make great concerns more accurately, I'm happy to go. We will be going meeting with them to discuss.
It's essential. I think to explain, I think the trees were being removed from the other side of the river. And I think perhaps the clear understanding of what the impact of that might visually be for people that are on the residential side was perhaps not as clear.
Yeah.
So, and so that really does need to have a capacity for those people who are looking across the Waihopai to be able to raise those concerns with us and talk. So we will be working on meeting those who are concerned and responding to those people who are looking to us.
One of the things that might be worth stating as well, we'll be looking at ways to work with the landscape to say, are there any low risks planting that could go back, plus working with the catchment integration team around for every tree that we remove, committing to put at least 3 trees back in the right, in native trees in a location, right tree in the right place sort of approach.
Right, I've got Robert, Peter and Lyndall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you for that. I have some concerns about, I had a great interest in tree management, particularly management of forest, mixed forests. And I think there's an element missing to perhaps our understanding here, I might be wrong. And that is the management of trees through coppicing and pollarding. If you've got a very large tree that's already in place, you can coppice it, take it off low, and then the new growth will still provide a screen for people who don't want to look at an industrial area, which would be probably all of us. But then you haven't got the same issue with floods taking that tree out because it can just snap off the regrowth, and that work can be done very easily, that kind of ongoing management. So rather than black and white, big tree or no tree, the middle ground is a coppice. People know what coppicing is, cut it off low, have the new growth come up quite quickly. So I don't know whether that factors in council thinking, but it really should. And not only in stop bank management, but a whole lot of other issues right throughout the region.
Not being particularly technical, I'll take that feedback on board. I think some of the concerns around the trees are the root spaces themselves being the tree, you know, whatever height, creating voids and compromise the stop bank, but it's not an area of expertise, so I'm happy to take that back to the team.
I'll be interested to hear back.
Peter.
Mr. Chairman, if you look at a series of images, take along to you to talk to people with talks that you have would greatly help. Because we know what it's like if you stick your foot in a fast flowing creek, and it's the same foot on the tree and sort of like, yeah. So definitely help.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. At risk of opening another can of worms, I think perhaps the visual opening up that the tree removal has caused has highlighted the issue of the car storage. I don't even know what to call it. The wreck yard across the river. That's and I've had a good number of inquiries from constituents wondering what our role in it might be in helping solve some of that car wrecker yard issue. And of course, likely to be aware of the Bay Road situation as well. So that has highlighted another issue that I think we perhaps need to see what our role is and how we can work with ICC to create a slightly better situation than we've got.
Thank you. I'll taking that comment from you and work on that. Thank you.
Sounds like a land issue, land use issue. We'll go back to the city council with no discharge.
When it's our issue, it's a contaminated land issue.
And it would be fair to say that that's, you know, this is not news, but the tree removal has highlighted the situation.
Thank you. Yes.
Peter,
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think here if I opened up a what I'd just like to say, I'd assume we do monitor that significant site in some shape or form, do we, this council? For any discharge from the
I don't think we actively monitor. No, I don't think that's that, but certainly I can say that,
but also for some agency,
Yeah.
I would think.
We
Yeah.
monitor the pumping station that takes the wastewater out of that area. And my observation is at times that is definitely polluted with oil and other stuff, but there's a number of industries around that area. And the matter of the car yard has been raised before, and apparently they've managed to satisfy the council that they are operating within the rules.
But we will certainly take that.
certainly take that forward, and actually if there's any requirement to work directly with ITC, we would.
thanks, Paul. Alistair.
Yeah, just, Wilma, I go through into your current situation, part of your report,
Yes.
and you suggest there that, based on the long-term record, indicates that the Matara River could reach 15 QMex cutoff. What's all that about?
It's always concerned, so I think.
So this is in relation to,
It's in your report.
yeah, so.
50.
Yeah. So Paul, I'm going to ask you to come and have a conversation about this here, because there are two different things that river cutoffs relate to. They're two.
Yeah.
It's the next item.
Yeah, it's the next item, but I think just.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll think about the one. Yeah, there are other matters in relation to decisions made by district city councils in relation to QMex cutoffs for other reasons, which I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure I hadn't canvassed in this paper. But I'm very happy to talk about where this might head to in terms of the water management of Matara. Absolutely, it makes sense.
But I think that relates to the
Yeah.
conservation order. I believe that's the reference. to.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we talk about that next. Can I just run through a couple of other matters? One is that normally we come to the table and have rather sort of grim news on matters biosecurity and talk about where we're at, but I'm looking at Ali because I wasn't sure whether she should be here or not. But actually I feel that we've got slightly better news in that regard in this report, and that some of our work is showing rather good effect. So do you want to talk to that or? Yeah. Well, we've got time to actually have some good news to tell, rather than bad news.
So for you, Mr. Chair, yeah, we are beginning to get some really good results, particularly in our pest plant programs. So we've been targeting plants we think we can actually eradicate, and we're beginning to find sites where we've got right down to not finding anything. So we need to keep checking them for the next few years, but it is really good that we're actually getting things wrong for the problems. And also, as you will all be aware, we've been really concerned about the spread of Undaria around Rakiura. So we sent a team back down there a couple of weeks ago, and a little bit worried about what they'd found, and they came back and said actually the work we did in Easy Harbour has significantly reduced the population down there, and they didn't find anything in Broad Bay or anything in that they looked at, and they didn't find any more Dedenium Vexillum outside of the area. So it's looking really good and really positive. And just a little addition to that is they just came back from preservation this morning and they haven't found anything untoward in preservation or the bits of Fjordland they looked at either. So we're quite positive.
Any questions on that, Andrew? So the preservation site, is that close to the resolution one we were looking at, worried about Undaria sort of moving on down?
Yeah, we were looking at it for both Dedenium Vexillum and the spread of Undaria and anything else, because it's one of the most important fjords and we hadn't been in there for a while. So we've done a really extensive survey. And
Does that point to it being most likely that it's not coming directly out of our access off, or that it might have just come on ship, or, you know, or are we just maintaining things at a level that it's not flowering and spreading?
all of the anchorages in preservation. The team saying are in really good spots in terms of if something does drop off, it's actually easy to pick up and probably not as high risk. The anchorages are in really good spots. We don't really know how it travelled from Breaksea to Dusky, whether it was spores travelling down the Akron. It's probably both, but that message of keep your boat clean is still the absolute priority.
Robert,
Jim, could I just ask Elliot a sort of genuine question? Given the intense, worrying warming of the oceans around here and the evidence that comes with it of much larger fish moving into the area, kingfish and so on, pest organisms are even more opportunistic than fish. How are we keeping an eye on incoming organisms due to warmer waters?
We're just trying to, when we're doing our surveillance as much as we can, and trying to do a few trips a year to try and look out for anything that is new or anything that shouldn't be there, and trying to upskill as many people as possible. But it's a really large area, and we're doing the best we can to look at stuff. We are quite worried about climate change impact on the marine space.
Morris.
On line 40, there's a paragraph about biodiversity. It says it's found generally lower. Chris, can you elaborate on that? Talk about what kind of birds you're talking about and what particular areas.
So all of that monitoring happens in bush sites that have had long-term pest control. So it's part of the monitoring we do to support the community groups to see if they make any difference. So it's generally forest birds. Most of the sites have got reasonably common species, so there'll be a range of exotic and native species in there, lots of cherries, bellbirds, kakariki in some sites. And yeah, we're not entirely sure what the difference is this year. Until now, it's been a reasonably good upward trend at all of the sites. This could just be a little bit of a blip. It could be the weather conditions. It could be something else going in the population.
I just speak just very briefly from personal experience. I've noticed this around the south coast here. Far less bird activity than previously. However, is it Glenham? There's a reserve nearby to Gore on the Hockington. We stayed in there, and the morning chorus in there was phenomenal. The difference is profound, and I'm just following up on what Morris is saying. It'll be interesting to know what's happened, what's going on, because those trapping programs around the south coast here are ongoing, but there seems to be a lack of birds. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thanks for that. Just on page 38, the paragraph there on the farm plan pilot, which is included. Will we get an update on that? I guess I'm concerned that government departments may want more information that is actually necessary. At the end of the day, we really want that farm plan situation to be simple for farmers, not captured by consultants. And we're talking about possibly having a portal that entities can have a look at some information, but not at others. We know farm plans work really well if the farmer owns them. And I guess I'd hate to see a tick box exercise where consultants charge eye-watering amount of money and it sits on the shelf. These farm plans will only really work well if it's a document people will use on a daily and weekly basis. If they do, we'll get the outcomes we want. Probably haven't got anybody here to.
Yeah, so what I can say about that in terms of my recent conversation with the Ministry is that, they've got this work back from us and from the other regional councils that have participated. They're still some weeks away from thinking about, the outcome of that. The Ministry does want to come and brief us and have a further conversation. So I'm expecting that we'll somewhere in maybe about 2 weeks' time be talking a bit about this and also the potential for being a model region in terms of how this might work because there are pilots. We need to be having those conversations with our territorial neighbours in this region because we need to actually join up with them and also with them on the process. So we're a few weeks away from actually knowing what the implications of the input is that we're doing to the Ministry. But yeah, we'll be getting a briefing on that, I'd say probably end of this month and maybe the beginning of March.
No, that's good, especially if it's not set in concrete, that they're still open to a
So
conversation.
their
So
intention
that's good.
is to model the approach to, so. I can't answer for.
No.
basic concrete.
Further questions on Wimblesworth Hall?
English tutor. She's going to come to mind, isn't she?
Yes, that's the next slide.
We're coming to the next item, which is the matter. I did want to cover one thing, which is that there was in this report always something from Emergency Management Southland, but of course we've had a really rather a lot happened since the paragraph saying, you know, what has happened in the past and on a national scale. And I just thought now's probably a good opportunity just to get a very quick briefing from Simon, who is looped into all the daily briefings from NEMA and Auckland as to, you know, current state and what we've kind of learned the last couple of days from this.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting me to speak to the councillors. Just a disclaimer before I start, obviously the information I'm about to give you is taken from sit reps that may be quite old now. So if you're watching the news at a later stage, some of the figures may have changed or be reported differently. As you know, there was a red warning for most of Northland and some of Auckland. I think the north of Auckland yesterday. The information that I've received today is that rain didn't come to much, that it didn't make any lasting effects on either of those areas. Coromandel had, I believe, one house that slipped down a bank, but that was dealt with without emergency management and was dealt with by FENS. The state of emergency obviously remains in place for Auckland. And being our biggest city obviously brings those issues of those huge populations. The figures that I've got at the moment are properties without water are approximately 3,000. Properties without electricity are approximately 650. Calls to the council regarding the event 1,040. And from my information, that was at 11 a.m. on the 31st, so yesterday. The red placards they've put up on buildings total about 118, yellow placards 416, and people requiring accommodation as of yesterday are in the numbers of about 600. People supported into accommodation, so they're actually into some kind of rented accommodation now are about 117. The people in the civil defence centres that they run in Auckland, they had 92 in that, and households requesting assistance 493. So they believe they're about through 36% of the building assessments, and I think at one stage there they were looking at something like 1,000 to 2,000 building inspections early on in the response. Northland has stood down all of their army and defence personnel that were assisting them for their red severe weather warning. And I believe there are some issues on the Coromandel, but none that have involved emergency management at the moment. My understanding is Canterbury and ourselves are going into somewhat of a heat wave. And there is some messaging going out from Te Whara Ora about that. And the West Coast is expecting some rain, and I think we'll be getting an orange warning very shortly. I'm happy to answer any questions if of me.
Morris, I'm not Morris, Neville.
Thank you. No, just it might be helpful if Simon could just tell us the basis for declaring an emergency in the first place, because it's become a very topical issue in the media.
It does require for an emergency to be an emergency. It's within the CEDAM Act in the interpretation section 3. Basically, it needs to be an event that threatens life or is likely to threaten life and cannot be handled by the emergency services or requires significant coordination. So that's a kind of rundown. I could quickly Google up what that actually says, but that's the summary of it. So what happens is when this situation becomes apparent, the mayor or the chair of the joint committee is approached by emergency management staff to say this is what's happening. And we can ask for a declaration at that time. And it's normally, we normally get a number of questions, and we rely heavily on the experts that we have in the regional council or in the particular area of expertise, say Met Service, to provide the information that means that a declaration is solid and can eventuate. Any declaration lasts for 7 days, and then another declaration is either sought for a transition into recovery or it's stopped completely.
Peter.
There's been some questions around the response out of Auckland of the disaster. Is there any learnings that the Southland could take out of that response or anything like that?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. It's really hard to comment on somebody else's response, especially when we're so far away. We have sent one staff member up there at the moment, and normally the correct criteria is to wait for the debrief after the response, and then the learnings come from that debrief. I know we sent a number of staff up to Westport, and we had a debrief on that, and we learned quite a number of lessons from that. Every response is different, though, no matter how much the event is similar to the previous event. And some of the learnings can be quite significant, and some of them, although can appear to be quite small on the face of it, are quite significant in the response.
Thank you. Just listening to the radio on the way in this morning that there's going to be changes to the act coming up, and there's quotes that in the United States after Katrina, there had been a change and actually the early declarations to give people more time. Do you think that is something that may happen going forward? At the moment, you're in a pretty tight situation before you can declare.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. There are changes to what's known as the trifecta, and that's the National Plan, the CDEM Act, and the National Resilience Strategy. A lot of those changes are modernising an act that was done in 2002, so at least 20 years old, and a lot of it concentrates around things like non-declared emergencies and what assistance we can ask in an emergency that isn't declared, remembering that we can respond quite significantly to an event that isn't necessarily declared, as we did in the drought last year. So those changes are coming in quite rightfully. The role of iwi in the Joint Committee and the PEG, so the Coordinated Executive Group, is going to be formalised, we believe, and there's going to be some better engagement with Māori, iwi, with the changes to the act. It was supposed to be in front of Parliament, I believe, late last year or early this year. It's been put off for more, I don't want to say more important legislation, but other legislation that has been coming through, like the reform of the RMA.
I think Morris,
Just, so what role does civil events have in identifying areas at risk, particularly say from flooding, so that you can focus on these areas when there's a likelihood of
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that question. We operate on what's known as a 4R basis, which is reduction, readiness, response, and recovery. The reduction element of that for us is where we work with councils and local infrastructure and guidelines to understand where there are fragilities or weaknesses within the system. And then we work closely with them to mitigate those areas. We've been working very closely with Randall and his Scott Banks over Solar Gap. And we've also been working with Nick quite closely on the water shortage issue that we may be having. Again, we rely heavily on the experts within the regional council that provide us a lot of information, such as Chris, Phil and Karen on the water situation.
Just further to that, and thank you, Simon. So have you got an app or a plan or something of these places that are identified?
Yes.
Or certain flood level they might be inundated.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, we're working on a more accurate trigger point at the moment, but a rule of thumb is somewhere near 80% of the design capability of the stop bank would initiate some form of either declaration or evacuation. So we learned just on Councillor McDonald's question, what were our learnings from the 2020 flood? Well, certainly one of those learnings was what part of Matilda or what part of Gore would we evacuate in certain situations. So thankfully we GIS mapped those areas and they're now sitting within our flood plan. So should we have another flood of that magnitude or more, we know which areas will be first cab off the rank to actually evacuate.
Robert.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My question maybe to Simon or yourself is that are you the person who would declare an emergency if it was a region-wide emergency, and following that up, are you well supported by a communications team? Because that seemed to be the issue, one of the major issues in Auckland. So yeah, both questions.
Neville's actually the man for Southland.
I'm the one that signs a piece of paper for the declaration, which I did for the floods. And I would say, yes, I was well supported and well advised before we got to the stage where they put the piece of paper in front of me and said you should sign it.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not the chair.
I normally would, but in this situation, Neville is my nominee.
No,
I'm the fault person. Neville's had a lot of experience in this area and it makes sense to have him in that role.
And you're well supported by a communications team because we don't want Neville to suffer the same fate as Mayor Brown.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thankfully, we rely on the expertise of the Port Council's media staff. We've got a well-practiced which is public information management team, led by Louise Haven from the Second District Council. And together they combine and make very good messaging. They're preparing for a media conference and any kind of visiting dignitaries as well. So they're all expert in crisis management. So when it comes to emergency management, it's just a wee bit of a
And I think Southland is probably in a better situation than a lot of other regions, and the fact that we're joined up, it's a shared service, all the territorials have skin in the game, and it has worked very well, touch wood, but it is a model that I know other areas that have looked at, including ministers, because it has worked well for us. Rather than having part-time people who are called in an ad hoc fashion, it's actually been one of our most successful shared services, I think, in recent years. But if there's anybody got another question? Do you?
Yes. Just regarding your question, Morris, about warning regarding flooding and everything else. So you're working with Randall, this modelling that he's got regions with regards to flooding in the Upper South Island, because that modelling is still being worked on. That I thought was where we were heading with the Matara.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we certainly are, and we're very interested in that 2D modelling that he's doing. Obviously, that is a much more accurate information stream than we currently have at the moment. We're doing it by experience and what happened last time. This will give us the ability to look at floods that we've not experienced before and highlight those areas of concern.
So the information is shared.
Yeah, very much so. We're working very closely with them. And I just must really point out that we run 26 community hubs throughout Southland. And those community hubs just formalise what would normally happen with communities coming together and ensuring their safeties.
Neville.
One other comment here about the information that Emergency Management Southland has. At each of the events around New Zealand for the last few years, Emergency Management Southland have seconded staff to those areas to assist and to observe, so that we can learn from learning that other places have. I think we did something in Auckland. Yeah, so we can get some inside information, we can find out what went wrong or what went well. And learn from that.
John, then I'll move on.
Just a quick one. Are other regions doing that? Well, when we had our event in 2020, did other regions come and do the same?
When we had the floods, we had representatives from the National Agency, from government, and from all the agencies you can think of, and other civil defence groups around the country came down to visit and work with us, work for us.
So in a normal event, we work very closely with emergency services. We're reconnecting with our Defence Force, which is, although small here, can be quite influential. In the 2020 floods, I think we had representatives from all 6 groups. And when I say from those groups, they're actually council staff that are seconded in, trained, and they came down and assisted us. I know at the moment, I believe Otago have sent a number up to Auckland. At the moment, we can only send one due to staff on annual leave.
Right, now Jeremy moved that item some time ago. Second by Neville, all in favour say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to item 2, which is the water shortage situation across Southland.
Which we will answer, Councillor Bishop, that will 15 minutes and direction process. So thank you.
Kia ora all. Let Nick introduce himself. I'm not sure everybody's met Nick, so.
Kia ora. I'm Nick Perham. I'm the integration and implementation unit for integrated catchment management here. And by delegation, I'm the sort of water shortage coordinator. That's my role in this.
So this is the update of our internal water shortage team and the way that we go through how we monitor and assess the water shortage situation across Southland. And so this is an update for you, and I'll hand over to Chris.
I'll take the report as read, but some of the key highlights I thought I'd point out there is that for a continuous improvement model, we did a bit of a review following last year and had a look at our SOP, which has been updated. Final copy getting reviewed yesterday, but it's probably the end of this week. I'm just waiting for us to find the feedback around that. One of the key things that we've done through that is actually clarifying what we've been in terms of our response levels. And this is internally for Environment South. And so I purposely put that in there for you guys to have a look at, which is ranging from our status 1, which is our normal business as usual, continuing to status 2, which is where we're currently at with our response, which is we're just actively watching. So we know there's potential for things to happen. Status 3 is when things start getting a bit more dire, and we are not only watching but proactively working with other agencies and the likes to make sure that we are trying to cut off anything before it gets to status 4, which is when we get to those real dire needs of putting in water shortage directions and formal restrictions. So we've been working closely with our territorial authority colleagues around this, along with their communications as well, because we're trying to communicate with the wider public around what these mean when we're moving from one status to another. Also with iwi, and of course, as Simon said, we're working closely with emergency management, coordinating all these things together.
Probably worth pointing out that the Simon was quite integral as well as the refresh of the SOP as well. So that's the two, including the feedback from the territorial authority is really important.
Yes, very, very important. So we've got that there. Current situation. So we've had a number of meetings as an advisory group, which is a cross section of the staff within Environment Southland. It incorporates particularly our science team who do all the active monitoring and everything likes for us. the current situation is the water levels along the rivers and groundwater is trending down. And you know, there is potential that it could move to a more critical levels. With the forecast that we have around the rain that's supposedly happening at the moment, and forecast over the weekend, there is that potential for a reprieve. I was just discussing earlier that we're going to catch up probably this afternoon with the technical team to see how that actually is tracking, to make sure we're on track with that. If the rain does continue, then we're probably likely to stay at the same status level for another week or so. If the rain doesn't eventuate, then there's likely to be with status 3. In terms of the question around the significance of the QMix, that's a very technical question. So I might just ask our technical scientist.
Kia ora koutou, thank you, Nick. So there's two reasons for, I guess, looking at the 15 cubic threshold at Mataura River at Goa. One is because consents are managed through 2 box, and so that is one of the cut-off levels for managing consents. The second reason is that 15.6 cubic, so around 15 cubic, we're at what we call the Q95 statistic. So that is the level at which we get below that 5% of the time. So 95% of the time we're above, so roughly 15 cubic. So what that is starting to indicate to us that we're getting into those, those low flows, and hence need to keep quite a watch. Just having a quick look at the website this morning, we're at 14.9 cubic at Gore, so we have just dipped below that threshold.
So just following up on that, we've got conservation orders on a couple of rivers, but there are cut-offs that start to have irrigators having to pull out. There is a little bit of confusion out there at the moment with STC advertising, only handheld sprinklers, and people are looking at the irrigators. And we always need a little bit of PR to explain how this all works. And at the moment, rainfall is patchy across south, and some it tends to be thunder plumpy type stuff. So it's not, it might be rain forecast, but not necessarily everybody's getting it. So we're doing the right thing with that monitoring and that good communication.
Can I come back to that 15 cubics?
Yep.
Karen, it's all fine. It sounds good. The problem that occurs though is at 17 cubics that Gore is to stop watering. And in real terms, they look at us, and I'm saying us because I'm an irrigator, and I'm busy irrigating. So it drives a wedge between the rural and urban people. Why is Gore sitting at 17 cubics that it has to cut off the watering of gardens and things?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that relates to what's in Gore's consent conditions. So, obviously you can't help. Sounds like there's human health risks there. So when their consent went through, what was discussed was the need to apply, water conservation measures to the town and plans, and the decision makers of that consent at the time applied, I believe, 17 cubic because that was kind of where the conservation order application thresholds were at the time that consent was allocated. So I believe the intention was to try and be consistent with the conservation order in terms of the timing of applications, but it has created a consequence.
The conservation order is that we take no more than 5% of the flow at the time. So in what it comes out into the media as, we're going to cut you off, but in the end, you're never going to cut off drinking water. And that needs to be publicised.
One of the issues I know with the STC is places like Te Anau and Riverton the capacity versus consumption. It got out of kilter over the summer. So it's not just like Lake Te Anau is not dry. Yeah. But it is confusing. I've got Jeremy, then Robert.
I think it's probably good for the, all right, just in regards to, it's probably good to explain that there, people have consents going down to 9 QMX and some don't even have cutoffs. So when people see that they're not doing anything legally wrong, they do through consents, and that's very clear. Even though people might have shortages, there are other conditions for other. So it's pretty good to explain that to make sure that nobody's doing anything illegal with this.
Yeah, we've tried with the current comms. You can be assured we work with the TAs around. They've got messages, we've got messages, and we know that it can be confusing if we come out and say something. So that's certainly happened. The specifics around rural continuing to irrigate versus sprinkler bans, I think we can probably factor some better or clearer messaging into that as we go forward this week. Certainly, we also learned from the water shortage situation last year where people were irrigating because they had their own supply, or they, so there was those messages as well that, so we learned a lot. It's never ever perfect because you're responding to the situation as it unfolds, but certainly the connection between what we're saying and what the TAs is really important. So we'll take that back, and hopefully this week we'll try and clear that one up.
Robert.
Thank you, Chairman. I would suggest that your efforts to broadcast these differences will doomed to fail, because town people who are not allowed to sprinkle their own lawn look out at the rural area and see their big lawns being sprinkled. So my question is around, is industry considering the new situation that we have here, where droughts like this or very dry periods could be the way of the future? And are they changing their management in that planting different grasses or different plants in their pasture that are drought resistant? Because it seems patently obvious that that's going to have to happen, but have you heard of any moves in that direction?
I haven't personally, but America, I don't know if it's industry conversations around active planting, or is that something we can bring back? Yeah, sure. Certainly with regards to bigger industry, conversations that we have where we're giving active updates, we're saying, have you got a business continuity plan? And concerns around the Edendale aquifer, we've had conversations with Ontario to say, we've got plans. So we've learned a lot again from last year, where we're saying we're actively having those conversations. You need to prepare, not just urban people, but industry and rural.
We've got Alistair, then Jeremy.
Yeah, I guess it's probably a publicity thing that has to happen. And so, but then people don't understand, how can we make it real simple? In other words, don't cut us irrigators, but we need to say to Gore, well, for God's sake, people, keep watering your vegetables and things until at least we get a way down, change their consent. Make it simple. I'm only doing that because I know and understand that system. And also the other point that I'd like to make is the problem is ours. We're doing nothing to change it, are we? We haven't put a dam in at Knockawan to save water, have we? Are we going, if we're going into climate change, Robert, are we going to have these things happening annually? And I see that they start talking about so many of the towns are using 180 litres of water per person. Some others are doing 360 litres per person. Is that shooting out because of poor piping? We're sitting there, we're looking at it, we're saying we can't go any further, but let's try to fix it.
Yes. I think that my only response to that is this internal team is dealing with the immediacy of a drought, and that's our key focus. So we've kind of got a narrow remit. We need to And as we're at level 2, we're actively monitoring. Level 3 would mean we go up a level, and level 4, it's much more restrictive. So with regards to those wider conversations, it's kind of back to Maurice's points around what do we do in the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years around 1 minute we're in a drought, the next minute we're looking at a flood. And so what does the catchment need to, what do we do in terms of that whole of catchment response? And those aren't easy, simple conversations that include us and other territorial authorities and community groups. And so that is going to be a fixture or an ongoing conversation for this council as we proceed over the next long term.
Well, I've got Jeremy, then Paul, and I might cut it off. We won't get lunch today.
Question, and look at long-term averages. How many years do you get to have, to get the average, a long-term average, 5, 10, 15? Because it is changing, I just said.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So monitoring sites have been in for each site's slightly different, but when it comes to climate, you shouldn't be looking at long-term averages on anything less than 30 years of data.
Paul.
Thank you very much for the information. Regarding water shortage, quite a few concerns locally that have been raised. Low flow, especially in the last 3 to 4 days when it was notified in the New Puckaroa River. It's our source of drinking water, and the source of our drinking water is below the regular. And we talk about limiting water for irrigation, and we talk about limiting water for sprinkling. We mentioned there that we would never do it for drinking water. Unfortunately, naturally, it may actually happen in an area like ours, especially. Have we got a second source of drawing water for townships other than low flow, drought driven rivers?
I can't answer that specifically. I know that when we get into those situations, we're likely at a level 4, and that's when we would be calling on the assistance of emergency management side from the previous conversation. But so I probably need to take that specific question back and come back.
So the other part of my question is also we get publicly notified through social media regarding but the concern raised by a couple of constituents were that there's no signage or lack of signage, and they're taking it in their own things to warn people. The Weir Bridge down to Excelsior Creek, even in maybe some signage of Blatch Road going up there. Just a warning.
So we are in active communications with STC, we're actually looking after that, and they're very much up at the moment.
Last question, Neville.
Probably, Chairman, the number of things we've announced and what we're talking about are actually decisions for their local councils, not for Environment Southland. So the local council make application for sources of water. We do consent those, but it's up to them to deal with that and make it up there.
The water up there, just thinking there before, we used to have an item that used to go to regional services, which probably be on our website, that had average water levels, average rainfall, so you had last year's, this year's, and the long-term average. I think there's enough interest out there at the moment that would probably be good to bring to a meeting, or at least have on our website. Would somebody like to move the item?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just going to add, we are just working on that report right now because it's the 1st of February. So just you may be interested to know that for January, the region received 40% of its normal rainfall for that month. And that period, 90% in North-Western Southland. So coastal Southland only had 37% as well. So Central Southland got the most rain at 54%. So Yeah, it is definitely very, very dry and obviously much hotter than normal as well. So we're just working on putting together some of that, some of those stats.
I'll work your recommendation, Chairman.
Moved by Peter, seconded by Alistair. All in favour, say aye. Right, we'll move to item three.
Yeah.
Anonymous.
Which is the adoption of the 2022-2025 Southern Region Triennial Agreement. This is an agreement for the mayoral forum that has to be ratified each year. So, and all the other councils have done it bar us, so it's good it's on the agenda for today. Is there any comments or questions? It's fairly straightforward.
The recommendation and time that, isn't it? We adopt the training agreement.
Yes, or
Apply a common seal, so that we're part of the group of council.
you're moving items to one. Moved, seconded by Jeremy. Any further comments or questions? I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. So to speed up a little, that's good. Right, we'll move to item 4, which is the Benamia submission. Environment Southland's response. Would you like to talk to the item?
So for you, Mr. Chair, I will take the item as read. This is just a quick item for council to let you know that we have put a submission in to Biosecurity New Zealand MPI on the current consultation around Benamia management, and it affects us particularly down around Brackira and Victoria Bay. And as much as possible, we try to incorporate the feedback we got from councillors at the session we ran with you in early December. So happy to answer any questions or any clarifications on it.
Yeah, well, just one question on the survey, and it was question 9 about not being able to discharge back to the marine area. I know some of the scientists, as far as the oysters went, felt that actually the shell being returned was actually quite conducive to the spat actually having somewhere to start. So I'm just interested, is it just general waste, or does it preclude shell being returned to the earth?
I believe it contaminated waste, so anything that could potentially have Bonamia spills on it. And we had a particular feedback from Stuart Ball in that workshop around making sure that we were preventing anything that could be contaminated going back.
Eric, then we'll
Thank you. Look, I don't have any particular problems with what we put in. I'm just wondering, we perhaps missed something in terms of lessons learned. And, you know, we're all aware, I think, that pretty much every wild fishery that was commercial in the world has been destroyed by Benamia in one form or another. And yet we allowed spat to be introduced from somewhere else. That's the accepted, I think, situation as to where this new strain came from. So I'm just wondering, you know, why didn't we have some rules in the past, and now have we got rules? And I look at page 72, and you talk about in the first series of bullet points that that oyster farming trials may be without strict criteria, and further down the need for treatment of contaminated waste and wastewater marine environments, a need for any rules to be enforceable. Who's actually now making those rules? Do we have a responsibility? Is it, well, who? And how widely are they known? Because it's all very well to act after the event, but something was allowed to happen that shouldn't have happened. And how firm are we on that in the future?
So through you, Mr. Chair, this is all Biosecurity New Zealand, so they are responsible for setting the rules, which is what this piece of submission is around, on changing the rule, and then also enforcing and making sure people are following the rules. So they are doing compliance and checking down. So in that case, this is Biosecurity New Zealand's responsibility. But part of our response is actually to say it links in really closely to our rules, our pathway management, our BMP, and the coastal plan. And if we don't get them right and we don't make sure that all of the legislation meets, it's going to be impossible for anyone to do anything. So we actually need to make sure it's all joined up and really clear about who's doing what and make sure that it's possible and enforceable and who's going to do it. That's part of the conversation we want to keep having with fire security and make it actually an effective fire security system, not just a piecemeal system.
Okay, thank you. Any further, Robert?
Just a note, the sound quality for people listening outside of the building is very poor. Is that something we can?
So I've been contacted also.
Okay. Normally it's not too bad around this table. Might be able to have a look at that.
During the breaks.
Okay, thanks for that. No, I think so. The last time there was a scare out there, it was like MPI and iwi were very involved, and there was immediate ban put on a certain area. Turned out it wasn't the problem, but there was pretty quick action. So long may they continue. If there's no further questions, would somebody like to move? Moved by Eric, seconded by Peter. Further discussion? I'll put the motion. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to item 5, which is the resource management reform submission. Would you like to comment on the submission? Or?
If I could just give you probably a quick overview there, if there's time. So through you, Chair, we had on the 25th of January a workshop just to liaise with councillors to get a sense of your views and position on the RM reforms, and also it's a bit of a learning exercise for all of us as well. Got information there, so thank you for your time on that. First of all, and from that, we've included in the agenda key submission points, which summarises hopefully some of the feedback and key points that we gathered through that workshop, and we endeavour to include all of those points in forms a basis for our feedback to New Zealand Parliament on the 2 bills in question, which is the Natural Built Environment Act bill and the Spatial Planning Act bill, which sits for New Zealand Parliament, and the submission is due on the 5th of February. And just one other point is that the endeavour is to do this as a joint submission with the other agencies, as in mail form originally. And so at this point we have agreement in principle, but there needs to be a confirmation from the parties if they're still going to be on board, and some of those parties may still make their own submission as well.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Really good summary of the extensive and wide-ranging discussions. So thanks very much for that. Just wanted to ask something that slipped my mind that day was the interactions and expectations and clarity of conversation with other agencies across our region. Like LINZ, where does that, because there's quite a lot of headbutting going on currently, so I'm just wondering if we've covered that enough in the discussions that we had in the workshop.
Just through you, Chair. So just to hone in, you're specifically talking about in the new system, how would that functionality? There is some coverage of that, but I think we could do some more on that to bring that out. It's a good point. How to put it into functionality. So just to paraphrase that.
Yeah.
Would be what is the functionality of that new system with regards to other agencies, especially central government agencies have responsibilities around that.
Yes, especially because we are, there are currently situations that make it less than desirable.
Morris.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I did send an email to Nick about some things on page 85, which are more sort of hobo type of things, but
I did think very much.
there's just a couple of bullet points. The second bullet point, which says the pilot will be suitable. I thought that should be may not be suitable, so it just applies to this area, and some other regions wouldn't have the same situation. So did that make sense? I didn't send it to everybody because, as I say, there were more typo-ish type of things. Is that okay to do it that way? I don't really want to go through all those things now.
Probably some of the typo things would probably, you could probably just, so. You just, thanks for the work you've done on this. And I guess most people would agree that the RMA reform that does need an overhaul. It's been there for more than 30 years. And I guess there's general consensus that we want more consistency, minimise litigation, national direction to give more consistency, but we still want regional flavour. And Morris has just raised one issue there. I am concerned about local representation, and it is covered there, and the potential costs to our ratepayers. Some of this committee structure looks to be ungainly. The wish for central government to have somebody sitting on all those panels, I would have thought that if the bill is written properly, it should give enough guideline for regions to have their own flavour. But very interested to see what comes out of the parliamentary committee on this. I'm hoping there'll be some changes, and I'm hoping there'll be some degree of agreement. Otherwise, where this is going to land is quite unclear. Jeremy.
Just to be quick, just to have an existing use right. Just noted, did we actually discuss that at the workshop? I can't quite remember.
On that, and I think it was more coming up in the conversation, especially around around biodiversity and then things you might need to do in order to get the biodiversity gains that might be needed in water quality, but also start coming up against that, I guess, in the we had an example of forestry, plantation forestry, and where there's some powers and some things that the regional council can do, but you can't go all the way.
It's just I'm just a last word there. I suppose it's when we alarm bells, sometimes it's good to have existing rights, but it just seems to be, I just can't quite remember the context what we're talking about. Probably I'm just making a note of it. I'm not I just can't quite remember. It seems to be quite broad and looking. I know in the past that sometimes having the existing rights has probably been when we've probably seen where it has helped us deal with some of the issues maybe the government throw at us to give us a bit more time to deal with things where mistakes have been made. I'll say that from experience, what we've had in the last few years. Around freshwater side of things.
There was a bit of a discussion about the words efficiency and effectiveness around water use, and there was a broad hint there that the current first and first served situation may change, and I think that generated some of that discussion.
Okay.
So is it something we want to have clearer in our submission?
I'm not too. I was just trying to tease it out a wee bit. When I was sort of late. Anyway, I'm happy to go.
Further questions or comments, Peter?
Comment through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for that, Nick. I think you captured the workshop. The main point around was what Lyndon was saying, around that localism and having some semblance of control and control of the world, that we want to keep our finger on the pulse of the region. So we captured that well. So thank you very much.
I'm happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Morris, by Neville, any further discussion? I will put the motion, or in favour will say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to item 6, which is the appointment of the regional transport committee. See, it's been by Russell Hawkes, but it's probably reasonably straightforward.
No, that's for 2023. Yeah.
Okay, maybe 23. Spotting. And of course, we've got Jeremy and Phil, who will be the chairs of this committee. Any comments you guys would like to make? You won't have a meeting yet.
No, we haven't had a meeting. We're getting that all sorted out. Catch up, so we'll get into it soon. I think it's just pretty straightforward.
I'll move the recommendations, Chairman.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Lyndall. So look, just for those who are new around the table, there has been a move in recent years to work closely with the Otago committee. And in some cases, we've managed to get a little bit more efficiency as the roads don't stop at the border. But, this is an area where underfunding is an issue, and we wish our delegates well with better movement. Seconded, if there's no further comments.
Yep, presuming that the names for the other authorities are their nominations, not ours.
Yes.
Just noting that, I think.
No, thanks for that. On that note, I'll put the motion. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against, so carried. Right, item 7, the update to the staff delegations manual.
Just a regular, seems to be every time we have a council meeting, there's an update to delegations manual, and it takes into account changes to role positions, to make sure that they're correct within our delegations manual, and also the authorisations for each of those roles.
So reasonably straightforward, moved by Jeremy, seconded by Paul. No further discussion, I'll put the motion. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right, item 8 is the council's meeting schedule, February 23.
This item, we have 2 leave of absence requests. Councillor McDonald from the 8th to the 18th of June, and Chairman Horrell, approximately 11th to the 17th of April. Also a number of changes to the diary, even though it's only less than a week old. We have human meeting with Bobby Brown to discuss beyond 2025 on Thursday the 9th of February. There are several Whakamana Tiwai preparation meetings, preparing for the agenda, preparing for the meetings, and debriefs have been added in. We've tried to make them all on days where you'll be in the building, but the very first one is actually going to be just a Teams meeting on the Thursday the 9th of February. The review into local government panel presentation, I have registered Chairman Horrell, Councillor Ludlow, McDonald, Evans and Roy. If anybody else wanting to attend, please let me know. We have to tell them who's coming. The meeting in Lumsden on Friday the 10th.
Any further advances?
The review into local government panel presentation that's been provided for all councils of Southland by that panel. They're coming to Lumsden on the 10th of February. I think that's when you've actually declined, Morris.
I'll put my name there.
Were you indicating that as well?
No, other adjustments, Chairman.
Okay.
I'll ask for leave from the 26th of March to the 5th of April. I'll be on the tire if the roads are open. And
Perhaps we could come with you.
there is an AF8 Alpine Fold 8 meeting at the time in the Mountain Pass in Blenheim on the 22nd of February. So council approval support for that. Have briefly by email discussed again who pays. Yeah, I said the council pays. Jen says
I suggested that EMS would be paying,
EMS
but
pays.
we will resolve that
Okay.
outside of here.
Jen, could I put the name in to go to the hydrogen roadmap workshop?
Morris?
Mr. Chairman, there's a couple of meetings that I said I could go to, but I think I've got clashes now. That's the Tarubataya and Dunedin. I'll have to give that one a miss. And the climate change regional meeting. Looked about that before. I've got a clash there as well. Anyway, so.
We're looking to have an informal meeting with the Mid-Dome Wilding Trees Charitable Trust people. I did have something in calendars that's going to shift. It's in there going to be on the council day on the 8th of March, so you'll all be in. We'll just make it work in on that day. There's a climate change subcommittee meeting going in on the 15th of March. It'll just follow the workshop happening that day. There is a tentative catchment liaison committee chairs meeting with regional services committee, likely to be in Winton on the 21st of March. The details of that are still being finalised.
Very good. Any further questions or updates? If not, would somebody like to move the resolution to appoint members for the council? They need to be that's in accordance with policy. Who was it? Lyndall and okay. Moved and seconded. All in favour, say aye. Aye.
The next item is reporting of expenditure above delegated authority. I've made a blue. This item was actually dealt with at the last council meeting in December, so I'm just withdrawing that one from you've already dealt with.
Testing us to see if we notice. I'm gonna raise it.
Motion, Chairman.
So item 9 is withdrawn. We'll move to item 10, which is the schedule of the 2023 executive meetings. Probably don't need too much comment on that, but it's always good for people to attend those. They're quite interesting where you can.
Will they be noted?
Moved, they've been noted by Eric, seconded by Lyndall. All in favour, say aye. Aye.
Maybe there's some coordination of case.
Okay, well, that we believe will conclude the public session this morning. Jan will give us reasons for moving into the public excluded.
Going into public excluded to confirm the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on the 14th of December, the adoption of committee resolutions for Risk and Assurance Committee on the 6th of December. Item 11, Great South Letter of Expectation. Item 12, reporting of actions under delegated authority for emergency works. Item 13, selection of preferred members for Regional Software Holdings Limited Board of Directors. And your grounds are to prevent the disclosure or use of information for improper gain or advantage, to enable a local authority holding the information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, and to protect the privacy of natural persons.
Have we heard the reasons? Would somebody like to move the public excluded?
I'll move, Chairman.
Moved by
The
Neville.
reasons which have been announced.
Second, Bill. Motion, all in favour,